Once again, happy International Women's Day, North, South, East and West, and welcome to the talk Street Struggles and Solidarities, organized collaboratively this year by Gendered Organizational Practice Research Cluster and the Gender Intimacy and Sexuality Research Stream at the Open University, GOP and Genies for short. Before I introduce our fantastic speaker, some very small housekeeping tips. So the Q&A pane is on your right, and this is where you can type in your questions either during or after the talk, it doesn't matter. You're probably already accustomed to events like this, but please note that we're going to record this session so we can share it on our website. Now straight on to dessert. Our amazing speaker today is Professor Alison Pullen, a leading gender and work academic and one of those people who does not only write about solidarity, but truly lives it in conferences where she insists that diverse voices are heard, in the Gender Work and Organization Journal, which under Alison's helm has become a major international feminist hub and a home for inclusive gender research, and not only in our discipline, but across various disciplines. And of course, in the streets, where which we will hear more about today. Alison was also amongst the first in our discipline to start drawing attention to the visceral and embodied dimension of solidarity building, as well as the imperative of engaging in solidarity projects infra-politically. Alison has also made major contributions to the area of leadership studies and ethics. All of these strands bring us neatly to her talk today, which I hope will not only help us think about the role of the street, but also how the diverse people here today can work together in solidarity moving forward. So over to you, Alison.
Thanks, Nella. And let me say, I wouldn't get up at 4 a.m. in the morning for many people, and you're one of the few. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your solidarity over the past year, which has been a huge struggle. And thank you to GOP and its existence, and to the OU for housing gender work in this way, which seems increasingly rare across universities, particularly neoliberal ones. So I'm looking forward to sharing a few ideas in a very short time, and then we can probably talk about what we really want to talk about. But I'll read if that's okay, because it's 5 o'clock in the morning. We are living in times where inequalities are increasingly at stake in the world, inequalities that are unfairly experienced by different types of bodies. COVID-19 has exacerbated these inequalities, as well as the discrimination inherent in the global economic system. This is a system where poverty, lack of healthcare, unaffordable housing, and climate catastrophe are central features after Arusa, Fraser, and Bhattacharya. And I'm sorry I missed Chinzia's talk earlier, but hopefully it's recorded so I can watch. And of course, in my neck of the woods, government fails the most precarious and vulnerable. Focusing on collective social action against the exercise and abuse of formal authority extends beyond what bodies can do individually or in relation to other bodies. Turning to possibilities of communal intercorporeality and what this means for collective organizing and resistance is evident on the street. With such collectivity, we can move to a realization of justice. To do so means that effective sensibilities, material resources, and care for one another need to be distributed amongst the multitude of bodies. These are mobilization of diverse bodies that are both unified and different, and entails caring for embodied other people who are both known and unknown to us, but with whom one shares some level of communal identification across our differences. This is an ethical mobilization of bodies and is not necessarily about physical movement, but social, with an ethical desire to join, whether it be in the resistance against oppressive forces or in solidarity towards social justice. This collective organization of bodies can stand against dominant power regimes which benefit from the differentiation of social groups and individuals from others. In our time, we see this in movements that seek to counter the injustices resulting from neoliberalism, colonialism, and patriarchy as they are sustained by sex, class, race, political separation, and enslavement. Collectively, mobilized bodies, ethically motivated by social justice, threatens the social and organizational structures that reinforce dominant power relations between the more and the less powerful, and between those who enjoy safety and security and those who are thrust into precariousness, essentially between the haves and the have-nots. This was evident as women and some men took to the streets across Australia in March last year, under the banner of the Me Too movement, led by Indigenous women, to say no to sexual violence in Parliament. Collective demands for justice do not end with a utopian resolution to all of society's ills. Justice is an ongoing pursuit that requires persistent vigilance, as recent attacks against people based on how they identify have taught us. However, different people do not necessarily share common oppressions, and on that basis are concerned with what is possible both within and across these differences through communal organizing. This evokes a demand for democracy, for a collective organization committed to freedom, solidarity, equality, and participation over domination and atomization of bodies. It is through the collective that we can live, after Iris Marion Young, the vibrant democratic life, which seems so utopian in these days, but where we can resist the tendency for difference to lead to discrimination, oppression, marginalization, and inequality. A desire to care in a broader political practice of democratic political action in the name of justice and equality continues to be urgently needed. Building on Judith Butler's ideas of recognition, to think about collective recognition is fruitful. Collective calls for recognition reveal both the ethical defense and the political intent of the collective. Following Butler, this becomes ethical when attention turns from the self to the other. To simply ask the personal question, what makes my own life bearable, is important in its drive for self-preservation. With ethics, however, we must ask from a position of power and from the point of view of distributive justice, what makes or ought to make the lives of others bearable. The quality of one's response to that question for Butler demonstrates a normative ethical commitment to how one's life is lived, and crucially reflects, citing Butler, what constitutes the human, the distinctively human life, and what does not. What follows is that ethical intercorporeality is not about reciprocal exchange motivated by the maximization of self-interest, as if relationships were subject to the morality of the market. It is about being open and responsive to the needs and struggles of other people and for the benefit of all. Throughout history, the appearance of people's bodies in an organized pursuit of recognition and protest is evident. This includes strategies such as street marches, public resistance performances, boycotts, and sit-ins. In recent times, we have witnessed intense organizing to resist popularism, racism, sexism, corruption, climate change, and now genocide again. The mobilization and assembly of bodies is central to social and political activism through the proliferation of bodies across difference that stand against violence and injustice. These are bodies that move together towards recognition and rights. To what extent however, can such political action be seen to be connected to a corporeal ethics of recognition. The bodily collectivity of the assembly is not an adequate answer. Indeed, assembly can be used across the political sphere for emancipatory and non-emancipatory purposes. This suggests that the right to assemble and to join with others in a common call for justice is itself a precursor to the possibility of collective ethical resistance. Assembled bodies are the site of collective corporeal ethics, perpetuated by political autonomy, grounded in situatedness, enacting an ethical sensibility between bodies in relation. For Butler, assemblies are recognition-based bodily presence. They argue for the political power of co-presence, where showing up, standing, breathing, moving, standing still, speech and silence are all an unforeseen form of political performativity. Moreover, the act of assembly is as a mode of organizing that not only exercises, after Melissa Tyler, a plural and performative right to appear, but also represents a bodily demand for a more livable set of economic, social, and political conditions no longer afflicted by induced forms of precarity. Political assembly represents the ethical and political imperative at the heart of a collective demand for recognition and justice. Assembly moves from an individual desire for recognition to one that becomes collective and focuses on the recognition of and care for others as is only possible through a larger collective struggle. For the marginalized and the minoritized, the abject and erased, this collective demand becomes central to living a livable life together. Collective struggle operates beyond egocentric self-satisfaction in the hope that collective recognition of the many can be gained against economic and political injustices. As Judith Butler describes, only when bodies assemble on the street, in the square, or in other forms of public space, including virtual ones, they are exercising a plural and performative right to appear, one that asserts and instates the body during the political field and which, in its expressive and signifying function, delivers a bodily demand to a more livable set of economic, social, and political conditions no longer afflicted by induced forms of precarity. Building on these ideas, Mariana Fataki and Maria Daskalaki note, women use diverse means to promote the politics of visibility, erasing public and private distinctions as they defend their communities and their right to live in unpolluted environments. The simple act of assembly of human bodies and the relation between those bodies is a means through which an ethically motivated democratic politics can be mobilized. This is a democracy where oppression of particular types of bodies and their continued capacity for existence is resisted by people working together in proximity. Assembly is an act of collective and embodied ethical politics. This democratic privileging of equality is ethics. Its ethics is not about a desire to pursue one's own rights as an atomized individual. It is an ethics that seeks equality for the collective, a situation where the I becomes undone by its relation to you, citing Butler from 2015. Drawing on Levinas, Butler underlines how such ethical relations originate through the self's vulnerability to the demands of others, such that our very existence as selves is already always defined through our ethical relations with other people. Ethics engages us in relations with others who we do not know, the stranger, alerting us to the existential fact that we live amidst a world of difference. This demands an ethics where, quote in the K Collective, being at ease with strangeness, knowing that we have no choice but to live with difference, whatever differences come to matter in specific times and places. Assembly, then, enables this coming together in community, across difference, in strangeness, for democracy, equality, and justice. Butler continues, we continue to need assemblies to realize democracies. We have to be able to distinguish between assemblies that are self-reflective and are inclusive, seeking to exemplify modes of democratic participation and debate, and those who are giving up on democracy. For Butler writes that for this social justice struggle to be characterized as a radical democratic project, it is necessary to realize that we are but one population who has been and can be exposed to conditions of precarity and disenfranchisement. Democratic struggles are plural, such that the rights to gender, whilst identifiable as a social movement, is one that relies on the relations between people rather than the assertion of individualism. Interdependencies and alliances between different gender identifications, as well as other forms of difference, stand against a neoliberal privileging of individualism and its attendant idea that identity is a form of personal possession rather than being the location of relations of sameness and difference with others. Interdependency is the condition of democracy, such that the struggle for democratic justice is a struggle for an egalitarian social and political order which a livable interdependency becomes. With radical democracy, then, public life and its physical spaces are the sites where difference should engage in productive conflict without the assumption of an idealistic or utopian realization of all of the needs of all. Instead, it is the pursuit of justice and equality, not the pretense of its achievement, that marks out the democratic project. Assembly can be understood as the practice of radical democracy. It is only with such vulnerability that bodies come together and that society changes in the direction of equality and justice. Sheena Vashani has developed these ideas where she talks about the political action, that political action and activism is reliant on the entwinement of bodies, practices, and ethics that enable effectual relationships, organizing, and resistance. Angela Davis's discussion of struggle and intersectionality as a more general mode of striving for human liberation shows how collective struggle requires solidarity and mutuality for a democracy that is not located in the heights of elected power, but in the power of grassroots movements. The movement of assembled bodies as a collective ethical politics becomes a viable form of organizing for intersectional struggle, which recognizes the intersectional diversity of bodies, but focuses on the site of struggle to envisage change. And Nella, your work speaks and develops this idea in very detailed ways. For Ziarek, then, assembled bodies motivate the democratic struggles against racial, patriarchal, and economic domination, where the respect for otherness is a necessary condition of solidarity and democratic community. Such is the democratic power of collective, organizing bodies in solidarity, or maybe it is about organizing bodies in struggle. So as I close, then, I'm thinking about how the future, both locally and globally, can work with ideas of care and community and put that at the heart of our organizing, such that the care manifestos vision of universal care recognises, and which reverses the systemic carelessness that are present in social hierarchies from Australia to the UK, and beyond, recognising and checking the privileges that I have speaking. Neoliberal authoritarianism then has been strengthened through the pandemic and continues to be strengthened through wars. An interdependence of care that recognises people's common vulnerability and our independence is needed, our interdependence. The Care Collective outlines how organising for universal care involves hands-on care work, caring about and flourishing with others and the planet, collective and communal life, alternative to capitalist markets, reversing the marketisation of care infrastructures, restoring welfare states, more porous borders, Green New Deals at transnational levels, creating caring institutions, and cultivating everyday cosmopolitanism. This is a movement of assembly then, or maybe it's the movement of alliances that is often organised in public spaces. Thank you so much, and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Alison, and for all these amazing photos. I will ask you later to talk a bit about these photos. But for the time being, I just wanted to kind of start. We already have questions from the audience, but I just wanted to kind of go back to basics for a second and ask you, how do you perceive the street in relation to some other democratic institutions and tools that we have at our disposal? My view is that the street is the only remaining space by which we can challenge the status quo, because all the other tools are either kind of inaccessible to us because we have too many tiers of representation between us and decision makers. They can be limited, such as media and social media, or completely ineffective, like the practice of petition writing that we have been participating in a lot lately and not getting anywhere. So what is your kind of view on the actual institution of street?
I think my view is exactly the same as yours, Nella. You know, speaking on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, we can see that the street is the only place where we are recognised in demonstration or protest. The marches from March last year were the biggest marches that Australia has ever seen against the lack of action regarding rape in Parliament and government. And in that year, we've seen major changes in terms of the government and related institutions take action, and has started to recognise the institutional violence that perpetuates in these cultures. So you talk rightly about the hierarchical differentiation between the masses and opportunities for change. So yes, we see privileged and non-privileged groups taken to the street, often together more and more. One of the photos there is from the 1971 marches on International Women's Day, where women took to the street to demand childcare. And 50 years later, in Australia, childcare hasn't been addressed, hasn't been recognised as an issue that would radically change the lives of women, because the only childcare available to Australian families is paid childcare. So you often see one income, a professional income, go into childcare. So we're seeing, particularly during COVID and post-COVID, women leaving workforces because of issues of childcare that could have been solved 50 years ago. In relation to addressing various forms of violence, whether it's sexual violence, racism, the street has proven to be the only space that we can take up to bring private concerns into the public. So yeah, the street is an important space, but also to recognize that the street changes in terms of what's recognized as a space of protest and what isn't. So when that changes from the public square to the back alleys or etc., the institution of the street changes and the recognition available to us changes.
Oh, absolutely. Such a wonderful response. And I suppose the street or what is available to us, the space that is available to us fluctuates as well, depending on laws and private encroachment. So it requires defending. So how can we then preserve this institution of street from shrinking further and further?
Yeah, that's a good point, Nella, because it is shrinking. We can see this week that the right to protest isn't something that we can take for granted. And depending on which bodies appear, those public spaces owned by the public is shrinking. And of course, in the Australian context, the public land available to Indigenous First Peoples here has been removed from them. Time after time again, the land is still currently unceded, and yet when the protests occurred after the George Floyd murder in the US, the Indigenous people took to the streets on the back of that protest, and those protests weren't welcomed in that public space. So defending public spaces, I think, is very difficult in this context, given the history of colonialism and the legacy of imperialism, the racial conflict on the street, the disdain for the police. So actually taking space to fight against incarceration and the continued removal of children, as young as 11, 12, 13 and put in prison for minor issues are an important area. Going back to your other point about how we can keep public spaces public, this is something that the City of Sydney, where I live, is failing, because it's being bought by overseas investors. Public spaces are very limited. And you probably have more knowledge of what we can do legally to protect these spaces, but it's I think it's only when politicians who want to keep these spaces, and it's the Green Party here, are into power, or they're able to attract enough attention for people to compromise on the land grabs that are currently underway. My city will soon be a corridor of buildings where public space is negotiated in those land grabs. So I think, we've got to think about, how big cities are getting. It's, and to me, it really links with thinking about how we design feminist spaces, how we design, feminist cities and back to politics and who's in power. But you might have better ideas there, Nella.
I liked. Thank you for having faith in what I think. I really liked your answer, and I don't think that I could add anything more to that. I did like the metaphor of corridors and land grabs quite a lot, because I think that these actually capture the practice that we have to engage in order to preserve the streets. I noticed Kay Kenny in our audience, and unfortunately we are all muted, but she would probably have a really good answer about the legality of or how governments can shrink that space in which we can express ourselves, in light of most recent attempt of our government to kind of curb the rights of whistleblowers and to make whistleblowing illegal. But maybe we can touch upon that later. Few questions that touch upon the recognition and maybe the role of streets in making certain, individuals, bodies, groups intelligible in a particular normative context. So Saoirse says, what happens with those whose life is made unbearable, or who carry the weight of the world? Are they recognizable? And then Liz said, how do we reconcile the demands of individuals against the demands of collective? And I think both of these touch upon the concept of recognition. And Butler.
Yeah, it's something that I'm still struggling with, and I think it's well. Let me go to Sergey first, because we started part of this conversation, I think, in a different time zone. Yesterday to me, today for you. Yeah, individual recognition regarding the vulnerabilities on the street, the threats of particular bodies on the street, the reality that some streets are not safe places, let alone for vulnerable bodies, in the sense that they are different to the mass who collect. I think it's a struggle, isn't it? I think we can take a lot of inspiration from activist groups where there is a common struggle, but also to recognize the limitations of if we're overturning or challenging dominant, oppressive power forces, that we need to develop movements between different groups, and not to get kind of perhaps this is utopian, and maybe this is the space that I'm in theoretically rather than in the lived body that I'm in, where my life is quite livable in many ways. But to recognize the individuality of particular groups in particular movements working towards the community, whilst needing to collectively organize in terms of larger impact, or to have that frictional larger scale movement. And it's something that I'm still trying to work through with the work that we are doing, Nella, with Mariana, Johansson and others regarding the cross movement, solidarity, struggle, momentum. So yeah, I think it's a difficult one to think through. And I'm also mindful of the epistemic violence in speaking and writing about this. But if you have any thoughts, I'd be keen to share those. Yeah. But everybody's on mute, you say.
Yeah, I think I think the key word there is struggle. So both individual claims and collective claims, they change over time and influence one another, and I think that's the beauty of the street. That's the space you can work through these kind of differences, find not common ground, but the ground where you can kind of be together, however temporary, in that space. And actually, Cinzia and again Liz, they kind of pose similar questions. So Liz said, what if the assembly is seeking to achieve objectives that may be unacceptable, like anti-vaxxers in Canada, or she mentioned yellow vests in Paris. And Cinzia said, thank you, Alison. As you mentioned, the Care Manifesto, to care promiscuously and promiscuous care from the Care Manifesto is an ethics that views care in its widest sense, from the most intimate to the most distant. So how can promiscuous assemblies or streets be caring, especially in light of what Liz said, that there may be some undemocratic elements in a street?
Yeah, absolutely undemocratic. And the sabotaging that you see in the street in various forms of protest. And I would say that I'm a bad protester and a bad activist and a bad feminist because I don't turn up consistently, as we see many do, because the turning up repeatedly is important. I think there was lots running through then, and thanks Liz and Cinzia for that. My first response was to think about the ways in which care is easy to achieve in communities. So having that local community focus is something that makes huge difference in terms of bringing about actionable changes for people's lives. And I don't want to talk about the work that I do in the community, but in relation to the question, it doesn't matter who I am turning up to the community groups that I work with, and they don't care who I am. What they care is our ability to be able to achieve the end result for that woman who needs refuge, or that family who needs particular support. Coming back to the street, I think there is a struggle between the recognition for the movement and the individuals and the ways in which undemocratic issues emerge. And I'm thinking actually, or I'm trying to think about the ways in which these issues emerged in the 70s. So Nella, I think we spoke the other day that I'm, rereading the socialist feminist memoirs to try and seek inspiration, that the struggles are always there for Rowbotham, for Segal, but the struggles or the lack of recognition or the undemocratic acts, as long as they're not violent, can't let us get in the way of whether it's developing the feminist movement, or whether it's about developing some sense of sisterhood, or whether it's about achieving socialist or left means, you know, and I'm being intentionally vague there, because I really struggle with left and green politics in the Australian context, and because the priority here is reconciliation for First Nations people, and the people that I work with care about, you know, care about land activism. They care about keeping their kids out of jail and in school, and being able to live healthy lives. So I think I have no answer, but I've got some ramblings, and I'd be keen again to hear what people think. And you, Nilla, did Owen just put in the chat something about sanctuary? Because I really kind of like that idea, whether it's as a metaphor or in a very real sense. But that's what feminist groups have always built, isn't it? Sanctuary.
Yeah, and I mean, and you mentioned radical democracy before, and I think radical democracy can help us precisely achieve that, which you just described. It prevents us being complacent, and, you know, allows us to question not only others' political standpoints, but our own as well. Kate Kenny, I got to Kate in this chat finally. So she said, thank you for this rich presentation, bringing together so many critical ideas. Really appreciate the focus on the street. Does it, in your view, apply to the online street, or are physical bodies together a vital aspect? And this is such a great question. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And yes, look, I don't know whether Sheena's here, and Sheena could actually answer this with me. But yes, the street as a metaphor would be the online resistance, in the sense that Sheena and myself saw in the Everyday Sexism project the need to connect and to lodge that complaint, and to keep turning up and lodging the cases of everyday sexism, and then, you know, having that online solidarity. Yes, that would be an online street. But it's the endurance test, isn't it, about how many times do we keep recording the cases of everyday sexism or racism, sexist racism, you know, brutal misogyny in the Australian context, something that I just can't understand as a foreigner growing up in the hills of Wales. But yeah, absolutely, the online street. I just think that I think there's much more that we can do to use online spaces, both in terms of complaints and in terms of the politics of shame that many people here today have worked with. And I thought it was really interesting waking up this morning and seeing the pay gap app. Like, where did this come from? And it is quite incredible to see that every time an institution posts on International Women's Day, the Pay Gap app notifies publicly the institution on their gender pay gap. So, you know, if that was, if that could be seen as an online street, then it's working, isn't it?
Yeah, I bet they will be frantically deleting that.
Everybody is, apparently. It took off because it's the speed of this, isn't it? So yes, Chintzia, thank you. Pay Gap app, I did remember it right. It's wonderful. And thank you for your Twitter activity this morning, because I wouldn't have seen it otherwise. But yeah, incredibly simple. And it does show the need for us to think differently across different spaces and disciplines, and which is why, you know, the work that you're doing with GOP, which to me seems to be, Sheena's here. Oh, wow, amazing. Yes, she's saying something, but I can't read it. Oh, that's so good. We've been meaning to catch up for weeks. Yes, but that's fantastic. Oh, I'm all overcome that Sheena and myself is on this online street, because the space that you're creating with GOP, and did you say, was it Jeannie?
Yeah, genies. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Then this is the only street that I'm going to have this week. So by turning up, and for me, it's not recognition for me, but it is about the recognition of the gender work that needs to happen, particularly in a context, Nella, where you know that gender courses in Australia are being closed. People who do gender work are marginalised. Women over 50 are being made redundant, etc., etc. So this is a political street, just to be able to mention these issues.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's such a wonderful response. I think that both, if I can add my penny worth, I think that both spaces are very important for feminist movements and for organizing. They're just different. What you can do in physical space that you perhaps may struggle with in an online space is actually become aware of that mutual vulnerability that Butler was talking about. So you can see people, including your adversaries and including your enemies in flesh and blood, and you know, you expose yourself to them, they expose themselves to you in their full vulnerability. In protest, I talked about this protest an hour ago that I participated in. You know, I've seen women, all these abstract women that I was against, mothers of you know, 3 and more children, who were fighting to preserve their revoked benefits that were effectively kind of restricting them to private sphere forever. All those women I was against, I just became aware through that physical encounter how much we actually have in common. And this is where that compassion that I lacked in an online space actually emerged when I saw, you know, traces of hardship on their faces and their hands, and you know, and their clothes and everything else, and you know, their perseverance and struggle of sleeping in the street for months in slate rain, in snow, in scorching sun, but not giving up. And I think we would be divided. We would be occupying different spaces and leading different kinds of politics if it wasn't for that encounter. But we did manage to find common place of action, put it that way. But sorry, this is not my talk.
No, I was enjoying listening to you, and I think it's really important to think about the level of poverty rising, and the ways in which, in my context now, we live in a police state. So those people who are desperately in need of public spaces for shelter and safety are those that are deemed the most problematic to society, and there's something fundamentally wrong when you see this increasing during these times. Yeah. And so easy to fix. But we don't, because inequality is what's wanted.
Yeah, precisely. A great question from Amna Sarver, who also worked as a chair today, one of our PhD students. Thank you, Alison, for your talk. I want to ask you a question about what if the institution of the streets fail for some and are successful for others. In Pakistan, we have a social movement which started from street-level protests by ethnic minorities against urban violence and policing. Many women participated in those protests, but their concerns of gender violence was always suppressed to give more space to ethnic violence. Who dominates the streets remain a concern. Can you please share some views on this? Thank you.
Oh, that's really, really important point, and I don't know. What I will say is that I have a student coming from Pakistan. She's been waiting to come to Australia for 3 years now to study this within the broad context of Me Too, and this is something that she wants to look at, and I don't know the context of Pakistan, but I think we always prioritize the most pressing issues for the community, and that's at different times. I guess given the protest or taking to the street around issues of ethnicity, I just wonder whether there can be more of a movement by joining with other groups, or whether the recognition that comes from identity-based politics is important within that local context. So I don't know. I don't know the local situation in Pakistan. But if we think about other parts of the world, and I'm thinking about the women farmers actually in India that took to the streets regarding the removal of farming rights and land. And it was the women who used their women's bodies in order to protest in terms of their husband's land. So they intentionally used their role as women in order to address issues of land rights. And here you see the same. You see land protesters, and you see people campaigning for Aboriginal Lives Matter, and they join forces. So I guess theoretically, I'd be thinking about the ways in which there is this kind of cross-fertilization of movements. But in the context of Pakistan, which I don't know, if the identity-based politics and the movement associated with that is such, then that's how it needs to be. Nella, did you have any thoughts on that? Given I'm just thinking about your work around embodied agonism, and whether that conflict and struggle could be applied to this context, in the sense that we suppress one struggle for another struggle, and how that would manifest.
Yeah, without taking too much space, but I think that conflict, at least the conflict, the kind of conflict that MOVE put forward, can be very productive in this case. So it can be exclusionary when we exclude those who oppress us, like corrupt governments, or right-wing movements, or far-right movements, or terrorists and so on. But it can be very productive, because through this exclusionary, that is to say, linguistic exclusions rather than practical exclusions. So when we engage with one another in a dialogue, and when we try to deny each other a place, a political subjectivity and a space for action, this is where, if you are both committed to kind of democratic principles and maintaining democracy, then out of that conflict something will be born, something hopefully that could work for both sides, and you can learn about struggles of one another. Because if you're in the street, my opinion is that you are not privileged, you're just differently marginalized. So this is that space where you can, this is the type of conflict where you can share that. I am just mindful of time, and Joe Bruce, I unmuted your mic because I can't access the link that you passed, but you said that very powerful presentation, Alison, thank you. Just to note the imminent passage of this authoritarian nonsense over here, I can see that it is to do with police crime sentences and courts bill, but I can't access it, and I have a feeling that it has something to do with the exclusions that Saoirse is mentioning, and that Amna was mentioning. So Saoirse said, what of those who have little, if any, access to the street and public space, those incarcerated, as you've mentioned, but also immigrant women in England who may not speak English, you know, and I excluded from public life. So maybe, yeah, maybe you can talk about that, because I had a similar question as well, about the basic rules of street engagement in a protest or a march, if there are any. And I'm thinking of exactly these kind of relationship to those who are more marginalized in relation to us in a particular context, whose voices may be subdued, of those who are differently abled, speak different language, and so on.
Yeah. So first of all, I think the street was a space available to women, not like the women that went before me, where I grew up. So the street was very much a space for upper middle class women to be able to fight for basic provisions, really. And one of the photos you see there is from the miners' strike, and that was one of the only times in my life where I saw women take to the streets in their own rights. Was it 84? Because they couldn't feed their children. And women, the police, as other people in the UK will remember, the police on the streets in Wales, where I grew up, was unprecedented, and women knew that they could achieve as much. So this isn't something that I'm familiar with, but I've been watching a lot of TV in COVID, and I am always struck by how very small acts lead to something much more significant. But coming back to the street that precludes some other people, the street is often a space for able bodies, and but the street can also be reclaimed in creative ways to offer disruption, whether it's wheelchairs blocking the harbour bridge, or lying down in the middle of a highway. But it reminds me to think about, what does it take for somebody who has been so dispossessed from the street to actually arrive on the street? And it is a kind of last resort attempt, which I think we see a lot more now, because I think we're living in times of absolute desperation. From universities to the police. The point about being incarcerated is really important. And I think, you know, looking at the intersectional struggles is an important way forward, and to think more about the vulnerability involved in what that looks like and who we care for, or whether we can care for some. So yeah, that's my ramblings, but I'm not sure I've answered all the different components.
Very good rambling. A comment from Michael Gosong. Thanks, Alison. This street theory reminds me of the first International Women's Day in a semi-urban region of Cameroon in March 2000. One set of women associations defending the tribal values for subordination of women were marching on one side of the street, trying to disrupt the celebrations. A larger group of women advocating equality were marching on the opposite direction towards the community center for Women's Day celebration. And the men watched in awe, confusion, anger. Sadly, some domestic violence occurred on the day. What I witnessed and am hearing today is true. Only on the street could everyone accept that things should never be the same again. That's a very nice comment. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, and it reminds me, given the times that we live in, of Enloe, Cynthia Enloe, when she writes and speaks frequently about patriarchy can be sustained with the infighting amongst women. We don't need anybody else's involvement if we keep having these internal dialogues. But yeah, within the struggle between the public spaces where some women find great safety from the home, which is a contested and violent space, there is a direct correlation between the experience of intimate partner violence and agency on the street.
We have so many questions and wonderful comments. I think in a way we are only warming up. I'm aware that we broke the timeline, but I hope that you don't mind me squeezing just one more question because I'm enjoying myself so much. Sorry for abusing our friendship. Mariana Johansson said, thank you for these thoughtful reflections, Alison. What role, if any, do you think hope might play as a kind of generative force for solidarity and action?
Yeah,
a chance to close on
yeah, look, hope is the, Sheila Rowbotham's book that I'm reading currently about daring to hope. I don't want to have any kind of theoretical discussion for hope, but without hope, we have no future. And in all the doom and gloom, and I hope Sheena's still here and is laughing at me, but in all the doom and gloom, I think we have to find not only the small acts of resistance for a revolution, but we have to find those small acts of joy, whatever it may be, because the struggle's real and the fatigue is real, particularly when we work and live in undemocratic context. It's tiring without the work that we do. So on the positive note, Mariana, I think it's been good to be on the street together today, and that will help me survive through the science homework that needs to be submitted today in the floods, because we have a government that doesn't believe in climate crisis. And I'll be thinking about you all when I go back to bed, when everybody's at work and school.
Well, thank you ever so much for this fantastic talk and discussion. I truly, genuinely enjoyed it, and sorry for taking advantage of your time as well. Unfortunately, this is all time that we have on our hands, but please keep, tracking us on this address, I want to say, but I don't know if we're that synchronized. It should appear on the slide. Basically, do follow us on Twitter, on OUBS Business School account, and do write to us on gop-research.openac.uk. We'd love to hear from you, and stay tuned for all our upcoming events, and we have some amazing plans. Thank you for thought-provoking questions as well, and sorry we couldn't get to read out all of them, but hope to see you in the future events. Bye.